Wema, I'm so excited to be here with you. The conversations we've had leading up to this have just been so engaging and interesting. And as we've talked about, the topic of change and uncertainty is so relevant. You've got such great perspective and experience. So I wanted to start there actually asking you, what have you seen from your clients around the kind of change and uncertainty they're experiencing?
Yes, and thank you, Bill. It's such a pleasure to be here with you and your team. And what a relevant topic that is top of mind and very important for organizations to focus on now. And what I've been seeing is that, during, these times of uncertainty, organizations are really trying to figure out how to move the innovation, the creativity, and the kind of reinvention, right, and experimentation of their workforce forward. I
Mhm.
think there is a natural human behavior to during the times of uncertainty to actually paralyze and just to do what you've always been doing, right?
Mhm.
Status quo reigns supreme during this time because no one wants to be, that person that steps out, try something new, and may be seen as unsuccessful, as failing. But in fact, the opposite is true. When in times of uncertainty, amidst these times, it's an opportunity to reinvent and actually reimagine how work gets done because of that, because you're really looking at how do you do things that will help drive growth, help spark performance in ways that you haven't done before
Yeah.
to meet the demands of a changing market.
Yeah, I love that point you just made. The human brain is wired to default to protection, not risk. In normal times, and then when there's uncertainty, it's even more wired to protect ourselves. Yet, high performance, innovation, growth, all the things you're talking about, that requires risk taking. People have to try new things. They have to be open to somebody challenging the status quo. In a organizational assessment we do, we talk about the idea of naming inconvenient truths on a team, which most organizations score really low in. Well, we all know what happens when an inconvenient truth isn't named. Then the issue doesn't get addressed, the idea doesn't come out, and then there's a meeting after the meeting to talk about what wasn't said in the meeting. So you're bang on with that idea that um, dealing with change and uncertainty requires risk taking, but we're wired not to.
Yes, yes. And also, it requires the organization to create this environment where they understand that risk taking will actually absolutely spark growth,
Yeah.
differentiation, spark market competitiveness. However, it actually also may spark failures, which you can learn to, that will lead to growth, will lead to innovation. And that has to actually be put in place, especially during these times. There has to be more empowerment given to
Mhm.
leaders, managers, and teams, and more trust that you've hired people who are smart, who are competent, who can deliver. Give them, right, that freedom within a frame to do just that, and use this as a way that they feel equipped and enabled to really work, experiment, disrupt, and improve.
Yeah. I mean, by the way, I love what you just said, that whole idea of failure. I mean, that's required again to try new things, to be able to grow. But in times of uncertainty, when it's like, well, but they might be looking at letting people go. I better not expose myself to failure. So that it becomes even more less of a behavior that people are willing to perform. The other thing I want to pick up on is the idea that um, there's the environment that we're in, creating a culture. And we're going to talk about culture in a few minutes. But we know from research that in order for someone to be able to show up and perform a specific set of behaviors with with a certain attitude that you need, there's really two parts to it. And it's 50-50. The first part is their own skills and capability and attitude. The other 50%, though, is the environment they're in. So if you want to create an environment where people speak up, but senior leaders are shooting their ideas down, they're much less likely to speak up.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is where, you have to be mindful of, like, the group think, right? Because
Yes.
you think that during this time, I'm just going to, agree with everyone, the leaders. I'm going to do what everybody else does, because I don't want to be, that one, dissenting voice in the room that may be right, right? That may be
Yeah.
needed. But because of the fear that I feel and what risk or what repercussion that may take, I'm going to kind of, ally myself with others. And sometimes, in strategies, you think about groupthink as like, oh, well, give everybody, the whole Peloton model, right? We're all together. That's a wonderful absolutely
Yeah.
inventive and creative way that you think about groupthink, right? And that
Yeah.
energy that is absorbed by everyone. However, there is the dark side and the bad side of groupthink in this space and in this time, where you adopt those, the same mindset, the same
Yeah.
opinions, and you suppress. Literally, sometimes you suppress the very thing that you were hired to do because you feel like there's too much at risk.
By the
Because
way, I don't know if you know this, but I'm an avid cyclist, so the idea of the Peloton really speaks to me. And we started studying this idea of risk taking about 7 or 8 years ago, and we've been in business for 25 years, but we really started looking at risk taking because we know that's what's required for high performance, and we've actually been able to quantify it with what we call the last 8%. So for those on who are on here who know IHHP and our work, you've heard us talk about the last 8%. I know a lot of you are new, so let me explain what the last 8% is. And this concept came up about 8 years ago. We were working with two executives who were, disagreeing about a change they wanted to make in the organization. So there was change and uncertainty going on, and they weren't getting along like that ever happens. And so they were coached by our coaches to have a conversation with each other about the impact they were having on each other. So they go and they have the conversation. They come back from the conversation, and the coaches ask them individually, how did it go? And they both say, oh, it went fine. Well, the coach knows better, so the coach pushed it a little bit and said, yeah, but did you say everything that we said you were going to say to that other person? And they both essentially said, actually, I got 85, 90, 95% of the way there to the hard part, and the other person started reacting, and I reacted and I stepped back. I didn't really step in and say that last 5 or 10%, the part that really needed to be said. And that's an idea that resonates with most people. And so we took that concept and we did a study on 34,000 people. And by the way, this has recently been published in the Harvard Business Review, this research. And we determined that on average, it's 7.56%, which we rounded up to 8%, that people feel they leave unsaid in a difficult conversation. So that's the initial genesis of the last 8%. One more thing, because I want to hear your thoughts on this, Wema, but as we workshopped it, people said, well, it isn't just last 8% conversations. There's the tough decisions too. There's the easy ones, the 92% where everyone's agreeing, I'm not taking a risk, I'm not going to fail, everyone's going to be happy. But then those tough ones where someone's going to be unhappy with me or I might fail. Those are those last 8% decisions that are also difficult. So, Wayman, as I've shared this idea of the last 8% with you, what comes to mind for you?
Yeah, what comes to mind is what I have been really dealing with and working with my client. I'm an executive coach as well. And so
Mhm.
I have several clients that I'm working with, which is a common recurrence theme around, let's double down on the celebrations. Let's talk about our wins. Which is a wonderful thing, right? Talk
Mhm.
about our
Yeah.
wins. Talk about all the things that we're doing great. But I always push to really unpack that is great, but what is it comes at as a result of, right? And so
Mhm.
your wins that you have, but these are, teams that have been stretched, that have been really spanning scope because of the changing dynamics and what they're given,
Mhm.
and they've, rose to the occasion. But is there anything at risk? For example, burnout. Is it anything at risk in terms of not being able to really function on, the
Mhm.
function of the group and the team? And what I have discovered specifically is really pushing them to actually say, with these successes, what are the things and opportunities that and challenges that come along with this, right?
Mhm.
And usually it's around, okay, am I safe? That the safety, the security of the job. And
Yes.
ironically, as a team leaders are saying, yeah, your job is secure, you're doing great, but they're doing that because they feel like they're in risk. And I'm like, well, how is that? Why is that? And a lot of times it's because of fear of actually being open and candid and honest around the dynamics of the organization that leaders think they're protecting their employees and their team, when in
Correct.
actuality is actually creating more anxiety, more fear, and more of the sense of I need to show up and work and
Mhm.
burn myself out in order to feel like I have stability in a role. And so when you think about the last 8% is really looking at and identifying that thing that you may think is good, the protection, the security.
Mhm.
I'm going to guard them. I'm not going to let them know what is going on. The dynamics from global is actually what's probably putting them in that unstable
Yeah.
feeling, and maybe actually putting them at risk of knowing just the value that they have in the organization. And so these are the things that I push. And I think, I love the last 8% kind of model because it really starts with those uncomfortable conversations that in the back of your head are needed and necessary, but you really focus on the things that are comfortable and that you're used
Yeah.
to, and really
Yeah.
kind of.
So I love that. And I'm going to pick up that part about we know they're needed and necessary. Another definition of the last 8% is that it's the gap between the risk you know you should take and the risk you are taking. And for those of us who sometimes avoid, and that's most folks, um, you're really trading that short-term discomfort and anxiety for long-term regret. Because you know when you didn't say something, you know when you made a decision that wasn't the best decision. And so you really are pushing that off, avoiding that short-term anxiety. Now, there are avoiders, but there's another default behavior. And actually, in our research, 68% of people, their default behavior faced with the last 8% moment is to avoid. The other 32%, though, when I fall into this category sometimes, I'm in that difficult conversation. The other person starts getting upset. Rather than avoiding, I'm stepping in, but I'm coming on too strong, and now I'm making a mess of it. So we talk about people either being avoiders or make a messers. So, Wayne, I'll put you on the spot. Are you generally more of an avoider or make a messer?
I am typically an avoider because I need time to sit with my thoughts, sit with the analysis of the situation, um,
Yep.
and I may take too much time. But knowing, also kind of coming from an organizational, OD background and being a coach, I have to look in my mirror and like, drink, the Kool-Aid that I'm selling. I know that those things and those decisions and those conversations need to be had. But I am definitely the one that will avoid first,
Okay.
anchor myself, root, try to do analysis, probably too much analysis before acting. But that is why the model and really around knowing those things that you are not comfortable with are the things that probably you need to do the most, and you need to do the.
Yeah, I'm a bit more of a make a messer. By the way, as we're talking about this, I'd love the folks in the audience just go into the chat and type, are you generally more of an avoider or make a messer? Now, I do understand that sometimes it's situational. So sometimes, if a senior leader is challenging you, you might be more likely to shut down or avoid versus when my teenage daughters are yelling, I'm way more likely to yell back at them, which, by the way, all I'm really doing is teaching them to yell when they're frustrated. So yeah, again, I love folks in the audience. To Kara, thank you for sharing. You're an avoider. At Travis, we hear that I've had somebody say, I avoid, avoid, avoid till I blow up and make a mess.
No.
Risa or Risa, I hope I pronounced that one of those pronunciations right. I'm experiencing that right now. I used to be an avoider and I've turned into make a messer. Now, here's the good news is there's a middle ground, and this is what we're teaching, where you push through the discomfort of that last 8% moment and step in, but step in skillfully so you don't make a mess. Not perfectly, but more skillfully. And that's really what we're teaching. And the reason that we're so focused on these last 8% moments is that they're more important than other moments. They have an outsized influence. And that's because of the cortisol effect. We love brain science and research at IHHP. And the cortisol effect is that when there's uncertainty, when there's tension and pressure and conflict, cortisol gets released, which causes memories to sear in. So people remember what you were doing in the last 8% moment. They don't remember what you're doing in the 92% of moments when everyone was getting along and all the deadlines were being met. It's those last 8% moments that actually establish your reputation as a leader in an organization.
Yes, absolutely. And I think to build on that, which I love, is like when you kind of think about the fight or flight, kind of mindset and approach to behavior, and going from a parasympathetic mode to a, calm demeanor where you can actually be thoughtful, be intentional, be purposeful. That is
Mhm.
where, you really have to kind of exercise, that self-awareness and knowing
Yes.
who you are and what you are and what are the environments that you have. And actually, before even you go into those environments and you actually step into that, know what your automatic, you say you make a mess, know that. But then to your point, make sure that in those moments you have prepped and understand your path through, right? So you can actually go
Yes.
from that fight, like that drawing to actually getting to yourself into a kind of environment and a feeling that allows you to be thoughtful, purposeful, and really have, constructive conversations and
Yeah,
things.
yeah. And I love what Christina said tied to that. I'm a make a messer, but I've adapted to pick my battles. So, as time goes on, we learn to try to be more skillful and try to choose, when is the right time to step in. So, individually, if we want to lead through times of uncertainty, we need to be managing ourselves in those last 8% moments, knowing that uncertainty creates even more likelihood we'll go to our default behaviors to avoid or make a mess. So now I want to talk a little bit about culture. And for culture, I'm going to share a few slides. Wayman, did you want to say anything about that before we talk about culture?
Yeah, the only thing I want to add about culture is that, as we're talking about the individual response and how people need to know themselves to show up, you also have to make sure, especially leaders, that you create the environment that there
Mm,
is, psychological safety, that
right.
there is, an open and continuous communication, that people not only know that they can kind of share their feedback, but know that they actually have an open forum for discussion that they can actually say, this is not working, or this is working, or this is where we should do. And really thinking about creative ways to do that. It doesn't always have to be in the Monday morning team meeting, right? It could be fluent discussions that you create peer to peer, small groups focusing on one, functional area or one area
Mm.
that the department may drive, or it could actually be, coffee clutches that you have before work starts that has no topic discussion that you allow people to share and exchange. So I think building that culture of open and candid communication that comes out of the formal meeting team structure is really, really important to help facilitate this as well.
Absolutely. By the way, we didn't plan this, but you literally just set up the next point about culture. And I'm going to share the slides now. So, for culture, hopefully are you guys seeing the slides? There we go. There's really two pillars of a high performance culture. And this comes from our research. We did another study on 72,000 people. Also, Sarah Sewell at Stanford's done some great work in this area. There's really two pillars. And Wayne, you just spoke to the first one, which is what we call high connection. That's that psychological safety. People feel valued, they have a voice, they feel safe to speak up. And when people tend to do values work, culture work, they tend to focus only on this. Now, this is critical because you need people to feel engaged. There's a 8 to 10 year mega trend where there aren't going to be enough good people for the jobs that you have open. So this is critical, but a lot of organizations, they forget the second key pillar, which is high courage, the ability to do difficult things. What we just talked about, stepping into those last 8% moments, making that tough decision, having that tough conversation. You've really got to have both to have a high performing culture. So we took these two pillars and we created a culture map. And again, this is covered in the Harvard Business Review article. I'm actually going to let everyone know a way that you can get a copy of this map at the end of the session. And on the left-hand axis is courage, and on the bottom axis is connection. So if we think of a culture that's on the top left, it's high courage but low connection. That's a transactional culture where short-term results matter over relationships. There's courage, but it's unskillful, right? There's blame, there's make a mess, right? When things go wrong, people are, emails are flying. Bad behavior is tolerated as long as that person is getting performance. And I have made this mistake because I used to run a sales organization at the computer software company I work for, of allowing somebody who was getting results but was exhibiting toxic behaviors. What I didn't realize is that one person exhibiting bad behaviors can derail the performance of a team by 30 to 40%. And this is a high anxiety, high burnout culture. It can achieve results over the short term. It's not sustainable over the long term. All right, let's think about a culture now that's on the bottom right. It's high connection, but low courage. That's a family culture. That's a nice culture, but people are unwilling to do hard things. There's more avoidance. There's mediocre standards, right? Because there aren't standards of performance. There aren't standards of accountability. Accountability is unclear and inconsistent. I mean, in some cases, it doesn't exist at all, but if it does, it's not consistent. It's slower decision making because you got to get everyone to agree. Everybody's got to be happy. And there's nothing wrong with consensus decision making, but taken too far, it slows things down. And people don't speak up because they don't want to upset others. or they don't want to, they don't want other people to feel bad. Or, when I was working at the computer software company, I got promoted from amongst a group of friends. And suddenly I had to make decisions or have conversations where they're not going to like me in that moment. So I really struggled with, we all have this need to feel liked with wanting to feel liked. Now, there are lots of positive things in a family culture. For example, there's high care, there's high trust, there's respect, but you're not actually a family. You can't fire your lowest performing kid. You might want to some days. I have two teenage daughters, but you don't. So it's not good enough. You're not going to be high performing. You're not going to be innovative. You're not going to lead through change and uncertainty skillfully if you're just a family culture. Wayma, just before I move on, did you want to make any comments on either of these two quadrants?
Yeah, I think I love it, and I love how you kind of identify the transactional family and the low connection. The one thing I would say, which you're probably going to get to, is really the behaviors that are associated with them as well. Um,
Yes.
because if you kind of really think about, culture and what it is, right? Culture plus behaviors equals, drives the strategy, right? Is what the organizational environment, the behaviors that you said drives that strategy. And what we have seen, for the research that has been done in terms of the skills in 2030, that will be the most critical skills
Mhm.
for employees. We talk about AI. AI is definitely one of them, but interesting enough, that resilience, the agility, emotional intelligence, the way, the ability to learn. I mean, one of my favorite quotes is the illiterate of the 21st century is not those who can't read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, or relearn. And
Yeah.
that is
Alvin Toffler. Yeah, great quote. Yeah.
yes, absolutely unequivocally true. And it speaks volumes right here to what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite quotes on this whole topic of having a family culture comes from William Wrigley Jr. He said, "When two people in business always agree, one of them is unnecessary." So we need to be able to challenge each other. You need to challenge the status quo, name the inconvenient truths, take risks. And that doesn't happen as much as it should or needs to in a family culture. Now, the bottom left, we see a lot less of this these days. This is low courage and low connection. This is your fear-based control, your fear-based culture. It's inconsistent, unpredictable, more command and control. There isn't a sense of belonging. There's low trust. People are defaulting to protection, not risk. Everybody's protecting their turf, walking on eggshells, and people are afraid to speak up due to fear of consequences. If you are reading this and you are thinking, gosh, I think I'm in a fear-based culture, I'm going to really strongly urge you to evaluate one, whether you can have any influence in changing the culture, and if not, consider your options because it is a very high stress, difficult place to operate from. I've been in a fear-based culture and it actually impacted my mental health. Okay, the aspiration, the North Star is to get to the upper right-hand quadrant. In our research, 14% of teams, and by the way, the other thing to know about culture is culture doesn't exist across an organization, it exists on teams, which is good because that means anybody here, whether you're a manager or not, you can influence the culture on your team. It's not up to the CEO or the head of HR, it's actually each team owns their culture. 60% are still fear-based. There's certain industries, I'm not going to name oil and gas, that are still a bit behind when it comes to these kinds of things. The lion's share, 37%, are in family. So again, if you're reading this thinking, gosh, I think we're kind of in a family culture, you are not alone. So what this means is if you're doing the math, it means 67%, the majority of teams, are not as effective as they could be. And again, this comes from the research published in the Harvard Business Review. They are moving slow because those tough decisions aren't being made. People aren't challenging the status quo. They're not as innovative because people aren't taking risks, the whole fear of failure we talked about. And most managers don't have the framework to address that. Instead, they're using guesswork and gut feel to try to influence the culture. What we're giving you here is a framework. This is a framework, and we're literally going to give you an exercise you can use with your team at the end to actually share this culture map with them and talk to your team about where are you on the culture map. So the aspiration is the upper right-hand quadrant. That's high courage and high connection. We call that a last 8% culture. That's characterized by high accountability and high care. So Wayman, you were asking about, what are some of the behaviors? There's high trust and smart risk taking. It's a feedback rich environment, and it isn't just managers giving feedback to employees. When a team agrees on the kind of culture they want to have, that it's okay to constructively challenge each other, then the team starts holding each other accountable, which if you're the manager is great because then you don't have to do it. They're doing it. It's a great environment to be in. But there's also feedback up. So another last 8% moment you want to be thinking about, not only, how are you approaching difficult conversations and decisions, but how are you reacting when you're given difficult feedback? Are you shutting down? Are you getting defensive? Because again, you're modeling, right? You're creating the environment. Oh boy, Bill's not open to feedback, so I'm not even going to bother anymore, and I better not, give feedback. So the feedback goes multi-directional. There's this balance that results in relationships. So it's not, oh, I got to give up. If you're in more of a, high performance transactional environment, you're not having to give up performance by adding more connection. You're building both and high experimentation and high innovation. Wayma, thoughts on the culture map before we do the poll?
Oh, I think it's, you and I have talked about it, and I think it's very, very much necessary and a great way to really show a depiction of, healthy culture, behaviors, individual and team that can really not only ignite the performance of a team, but actually, give the stability, give the safety, give
Mhm.
the opportunity for people to feel that they can thrive, that they can experiment, that they can actually have support for actually bringing the skills that they were tapped on to do in the workplace. So, yes, love it and think it's good.
Awesome. By the way, I just looked at a couple of comments from the chat. Ellen, I love your chat. Because when you talked about self-awareness, you can't do any of this as a leader. So if you want to create a high-performing upper right-hand quadrant culture, that means you as either a member of a team or a leader of a team, you have to show up with high care and high accountability. That requires self-awareness when sometimes you're avoiding or sometimes you're not demonstrating care because you're making a mess, right? So it really does come, self-awareness is absolutely the foundation of this work. So Alan, thanks for picking up on that. Risa actually just said Friday is my last day for that
Oh, yeah.
reason. I'm guessing that relates to what I said about being in a fear-based culture. So, I mean, Risa, like, huge props to you for having the courage to make a choice like that. That's not an easy decision. I do recognize when I say that. And then finally, the team have put in the chat where you can get a copy of this culture map. And by the way, we'll be sending a follow-up email to everyone as well with that. Okay, we'd like to hear where all of you think you are on the map. And a lot of you are on two teams. Those of you who are managers, you lead a team. But I actually want you to think of the team that you are on that you report to into your boss. So not the one you lead if you are a leader, but the one that you're on reporting in your boss. So Kira, if you want to bring the poll up, I want to see where do you see yourself on the culture map? And I'll leave the map up. Um, do you feel you're in more of a transactional culture? Is it more of a family culture? Is it fear-based? Or is it no, we're doing pretty good. We're a last 8% culture. We're balancing high care and high accountability. By the way, as people are answering, for those of our clients, that 33% that are in the last 8% culture, a lot of them are just over the line in terms of courage. So even though they are a last 8% culture, the opportunity to move farther up into the upper right-hand quadrant is to add more of that courage and accountability.
And if I can also add, Bill, that the quadrants are great. However, they are not stagnant. There's ability
Right.
to really move and flow through the quadrants, but that takes intentionality, right? That takes really the uncovering and discovering what are the team norms and behaviors that are either helping or hindering performance. What are the, unwritten norms, right, of how you do and
Yeah.
ways of working that are not so much acknowledged or not so much communicated that really have an impact in the individual's work, their ability to
Yep.
lead. And then, how are you taking the time, whether it's through kind of team offsites, leadership teams, but on a regular basis to stop, do that discovery, and really look at the operating principles and norms that can actually move you from a transactional or fear-based to that high sustainability and high performance culture. So I would definitely wanted to emphasize that if
Yeah.
you're in it and you have, those, resilient and agile leaders, that is an opportunity to kind of move people and move the teams, through the quadrants successfully.
Yeah, it's such a great point. I mean, there are times when there's a critical project, a client deliverable, and you are going to be more transactional. Then there's times, I mean, when you and I present at people's leadership conferences, that's all about connecting and the evening activities and and so there's times when you're doing more of one than the other. So really, we're asking you to think, okay, overall, in the last year, what's your culture been? Okay, Kara, would love to have you share the results. I think we probably got most of the votes in.
Bill, we also have a question from Jeanette. She says, what if higher management is in family and middle management is in last 8% culture and it confuses the staff?
Yeah, I saw that one. So I love that question. I think that really comes down to, as a leader, if your senior team isn't demonstrating what you think they need in order to have a high-performing culture, do you feel safe to discuss that? Do you feel safe to give feedback? And if you don't, you need to first look at yourself. Is that just because you're avoiding and you don't have the courage? Or is it you're literally in an environment where you're going to get reprimanded for that? That's going to fall on deaf ears. And so really, to me, that's about, are you willing to speak up and do it skillfully? Maybe bring this map to a team meeting and say, hey, I just attended this webinar. Let's talk about a team where we're on this map. Like there's ways to approach it skillfully. Wait, just before we look at the results, do you have any thoughts on that question? It's a great
Yeah,
question.
I think that that's a fantastic question, and actually one that is probably more common than not. And I think one of the things first to do, just to kind of ask the question, why is that leadership team, the senior leadership team, in the family environment? So there may have been things that they are operating from, past strategic priorities or past business imperatives that kept them there, right? They want to stay, keep the status quo. They want to maintain those principles that got them there. But there's an opportunity for leaders that may have come in new, have been hired from other organizations or
Mhm.
industries, that you can actually, bring in new talent, new ways of working, new approaches that, in a bite-sized, manner, really, to your point, Bill, encourage and communicate up to leadership. But manage yourself to do that on a very, case by case basis, so that you don't get disappointed, but you really trying to understand what are the reasons why they're in the family base, and is it because that the growth is not as much as they have, kind of the pathway, and what can you do to accelerate that in very micro moments and micro behaviors that could be adopted at the top.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing we talk about is, for people who are in middle management, is, you can be the umbrella for your team. So there can be different cultures all around you. Because remember, cultures don't exist across organizations, they exist on teams. So you can be working with one team that's transactional, a senior leadership team that's family, so but your team can still be high performing within that. You can be a last 8% culture within that. And that often gets noticed. And then, because that's actually happening for one of our clients, Jazz Pharmaceutical, Nina Patel is the chief legal officer. And they've actually been through our whole culture system work, and they've really changed their culture, which we know because we did pre and post assessment. She's actually getting noticed. She's actually been, what's going on with your team? We're really noticing how they're showing up in meetings. She's getting the seat at the table. And we're actually now doing a session for the whole organization because that's getting noticed. So you can have a high performing culture, which eventually will bubble up to the top
And that, and
as
that,
well.
and that's great and common. And I think, just orienting yourself in terms of just action, getting frustrated, really, to that point, trying to understand and do an assessment of, what are the reasons why, and what are the moments that you can take in terms of the leadership team that you
Yeah.
just discussed on, to really show those examples of the high performance, high sustainability, and accountability cultures.
And by the way, I have Wema as your executive coach. She can really help you with that. All right. So let's look at the results. Not surprising, relatively smallish numbers in transactional and fear-based. I'm sorry for the people that are in fear-based. A larger percentage in last 8%, which is different from our data, but that kind of makes sense because the people that have chosen to be on this webinar are self-selected as people who value culture, who are probably good at culture, and so it makes sense that the numbers are a little different from the general population. Ours was also a global research study. So glad that many of you are in a last 8%. I would point out again that even if you're in a last 8% culture, most aren't all the way in the upper right-hand quadrant. So there's still good to great opportunity. There's still an A to A plus opportunity. Um, okay, so I'll stop that share.
You, Bill. So to that point, I love that those that are in the last 8%, what are the practices or the tools that you give to your clients to sustain that and to grow in that? So that must be a lot of pressure to keep that 8%. So what are those practices or skills that you and your team actually facilitate to help them maintain and sustain that?
Yeah, and thank you for asking. And there's really two pieces. So we have what we call our last 8% culture system that we can use to drive culture in an organization. It starts with the senior team, whoever the senior team. Now that might be the CEO, or it could be the chief legal officer, or the VP of sales, or whoever the senior leadership team is, where they're agreeing on the culture they want to have. They're setting the standards and they're modeling. And then we're cascading that down through what we call sprints, where each team leader is owning the culture on their team and they're having discussions with their team. But this is the kind of culture we want to have. They're creating a team charter. We're going to challenge each other. That's so important because, Wayne, if you and I are on a team and you're suddenly challenging something I did, and I'm thinking, where's she coming from? Versus, oh no, we've all agreed this is what we're going to do. And I know it's because Wayma cares. And by the way, we have a good connection. I'm much more open to it. So number one is having that kind of team culture where you're agreed to that. The second part is the individual skills, and that is our emotional intelligence work. So we started 25 years ago as an emotional intelligence training company, and so that's still part of because I just had a client this morning say, I was in a meeting and somebody had a really strong opinion and I didn't speak up. So to be able to have and that's fear, that's emotions, so to have the ability to manage the emotions, to push through that, you have to do it skillfully. That's the other piece that we teach.
Yeah. And I
Uh,
love that. That's one thing that I really always have at the anchor. What are those principles, norms that are either helping or hindering, and
Norms,
making
that's a great
sure
word. Yeah, yeah.
a diagnostic of that. There's an understanding because I think too often some of the teams say we're just great because we're great, not realizing what and forgive me this language, but what dead bodies are left along the way that got you there, and how could it be sustained? And to your point about identifying those norms, those principles, and developing, for example, a charter, you have a safe place to hold each other accountable for
Right.
the greatness and for the really driving performance. You have that place, you give permission, and that there is no, personal effect or attack taken. There's
Yeah.
no, people don't feel like their kind of space or their territory is being encumbered on. You really give that accountability, that permission to really operate as one unit, and to hold each other accountable for the principles and operating norms that you agreed on in the charter.
Yeah, and it's pretty amazing when that happens, and I know, Wayman, you don't mean it this way, but it's not Pollyanna. It's not like, oh, we're all having a love-in, we're all challenging each other. Like, there's still times when emotions get out of control and people impact each other, but because there's that connection, because there's this acknowledgement, you get through it, and there's grace.
Yeah.
JP, the founder of our company and my business partner, he worked with Doc Rivers, who was won an NBA championship with the Boston Celtics. And he said, I love my players. He used the word love. So that means that they know when I'm giving them feedback or holding them accountable, they're open to it. And when I make a mistake, if I don't call a timeout when I should have or make a bad substitution, there's grace.
Yes.
And so it also is about, yeah, Risa, you're saying it's also about that grace and trust that comes when there's this. We always say connection comes before courage. So when we work with teams, we want to make sure that connection is there. Because again, if there's challenges, if there's difficult, if there's frayed emotions, if that trust and connection isn't there to start with, it's much more difficult.
Yeah. And that, yes, yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
So Wayne, we talked a little bit about this idea of what it takes to lead a thriving workforce. I know you've done a lot of work in that area. So I'd love for you to share a little bit of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, when we're talk about, thriving, we have to unpack that and make sure that we understand that thriving means in there being able to perform, being able to fail forward, being able to have, the safety and the support and empowerment to do your job, right? And
Mhm.
so that all comes from, not only the cultural basis of an organization, but the team that they're in. And again, we go back to the norms, the principles that are discovered and uncovered together. And I think that, today it's challenged to having this thriving, kind of environment because everyone I think is so, focused on doing the right thing, staying underneath the, the radar, making sure they maintain, right, the status quo. So there is like that fear. But I think that if you encourage and really look at and really turn this on the head and say, okay, because we're in uncertain times, there is an opportunity to reimagine how we do work.
Mm.
There is, greater, I as a leader should be empowering and encouraging, my team to actually reinvent what they do, experiment, because we are faced with unprecedented, market change, landscape
Yeah.
change. So you really kind of change your perspective on what the uncertainty and, means. And actually, instead of seeing it as fear-based, seeing it as opportunity-based. And when you look at that, that's where the thriving culture comes in because people will actually feel empowered and know that they actually have the support, they actually have the trust, and
Mhm.
they are really enabled to really give those skills that they were again sometimes brought into the organization to do most time and in other other times they have those skills and they are suppressed because they feel like I need to like now plug into the matrix and do what everybody else does, but
Right.
encourage them to really bring those skills and really think, innovatively, creatively, and have, that spark of invention, reinvention, and reimagining how work. And that's where the thriving culture comes when that is done without fear and, with the knowledge that the organization, and your team supports that and wants that energy.
Yeah, I love that description. I mean, thriving culture is for us the upper right-hand quadrant of last episode culture, and it really does start with assessing. So we have an assessment, but even if you're not engaged with us in a in a consulting engagement and not using our assessment, I mean, you can literally take that map and sit down with your team, whether you're the leader or not, and say, "Hey, let's take 10 or 15 minutes. This is what we do in our sprint process." And let's talk about where are we at as a team? What's working for us? What's not working for us? What does good to great look like? Now, if you are the leader of the team, the one thing we really coach is you have to be open to feedback. Because if someone says, well, I don't think we're doing this as well, or I think we're taking too long to do this, you can't be like, oh yeah, but this is you can't be defending you. There could be explanations for things, but you can't be getting defensive because then that just stifles the whole idea of creating an open dialogue. So we really encourage leaders to have open dialogue where they're listening empathetically to what the team has to say.
Yeah, and I think with that open dialogue, Bill, it really has to be a two-way communication, right? It has to be, the trust, the permission and really that team connection that the feedback can go both ways, right? So you
Okay.
always are open and understanding that, you don't always know the dynamics and what your team members are going through with their stakeholders, working in a matrix
Yeah.
environment, working with external stakeholders and being open to like, no, I don't know, and this is what I need that. But also, the trust and the belief of the team that knowing that, okay, our leaders are probably bringing in insights, influence from headquarters, from global, from these markets
Mhm.
that I may not have the understanding from a breadth standpoint and scope,
Mhm.
but this is kind of information I need to kind of re-engage and reorient how I do. And I think that that two-way communication, and like I said earlier, I think we need to get away from the days that it's like a Monday morning meeting or a Wednesday catch up, that it has to be fluid.
Yeah.
And it has to be fluid, it has to be consistent, and it has to be without guardrails. And this is why it really should come, through. And this is why I love, the first part of it is through connection. It must come through that kind of established kind of norms and principles and operating principles. You say, you know what, we are in
Yeah.
this together. We need, we each have a purpose and role, and we trust that we're going to share the information needed for everyone to be successful.
Yeah, yeah. And Ellen says, thank you, Bill, for mentioning the importance of empathetic listening. And let me build on that with an example. So you talk about norms. So one of the norms is being open and listening. I kind of struggle when I'm in a last 8% moment. Am I a little emotionally triggered? I stop listening and I start interrupting. Now, ask me in a calm moment, is interrupting a good leadership behavior? Of course not, but get me a little triggered in a last 8% moment. I had a conversation with our team, and I agreed that that is something important to me. And I actually said to the team, if I start interrupting, you can say, Bill, let's slow down. Not Bill, you're interrupting, which I'm gonna, but hey, Bill, let's slow down. So the whole team, if I started interrupting, to help me be a better empathetic listener, and I got feedback, even years later, how much people appreciated me just being open, acknowledging, what I'm not good at, being vulnerable, and it really worked. So now I tell the same thing to my teenage daughters. Bill, slow down. Dad, slow down. Yeah. All right. So I think, Kira, we've had a couple of questions.
Yeah,
We can take a couple of questions and then we'll close off.
for sure. So the question number one is there a small risk leaders can encourage their teams to take to start building momentum or get to that thriving team performance?
Yeah. Wayman, do you want me to take that, or do you want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, well, I'll add I'll share kind of my coaching and team development. I think that the risk comes, I wouldn't say it's a risk, but I think that it has to be something that inwardly focus through your self-awareness is that it's more of courage, right? How can you actually display the courage with a moment or with a job or a something that you're leading that you have the courage to kind of raise it and raising it in a way that is really talking about how things are gone, what you're doing, and why you are actually taking this approach. And I think doing that in a learning kind of spirit and educating kind of spirit can actually help the adoption of it and also actually making it seem, how it can be adopted and seen as a capability. So
Yeah.
I would encourage in those, micro moments where you actually are very thoughtful and purposeful around what it is that you're doing, whether it's a project, whether it's a decision, and raising that and sharing kind of
Yeah.
your approach and the reasons why to really drive that.
Yeah. Yeah. Another way that a leader can encourage a small risk is to actually ask either an individual or a team, what feedback can you give me as a leader that I could be doing differently to make your jobs more effective, to make your lives easier? Now, again, if you're going to ask that, you have to be open. Well, Bill, if you interrupted last, or if like you have to be open. If you responded to emails more, like you have to be open. But if they have that initial experience of you listening and then taking action on it, you start to create that, oh, it is safe to speak up. And I've had leaders ask me, like, I'm open. I don't react. Why aren't people speaking up? Sometimes it has nothing to do with you. They had a previous experience at another organization where they were in a fear-based environment and they did get reprimanded. Well, that's the cortisol effect. That's stored in their emotional memory. They come to the new job and they still feel the same way. So it's not because you did something, it's because somebody 3 jobs ago did something, and that's in their emotional memory. So you have to create that opportunity where they do step out out their comfort zone, speak up, and it goes well for them. And then like, okay, this is safe. Because the human brain, it's just there to protect us. It's there to make us safe, the emotional brain. And so if it feels safe, it's then more likely to, take the risks that we know are needed during times of change and uncertainty.
So yeah,
Um,
we have another
so
question from
yep.
Enrico. Just it's a great
Hi,
question.
hi Enrico, by the way. Good to have you with us.
How do we make
I
sure
know
culture
Enrico.
lives on as leaders and other members move on to other roles?
Yeah, there's a quote I really like, which is, if you don't teach your new people the culture will become like your new people. So we always encourage teams, once they've established the tenets, the norms, that whenever a new person comes on the team, they inculcate them in that. They sit down with them and say, these are the things we've agreed to, and actually say, this is how we operate as a team. Because otherwise, yeah, especially when the leader changes. So the team can say, hey, new leader, this is what we're agreeing to as the culture we want that's been working. Now, maybe there's opportunities for improvement, but that's the place to start.
And if I can add to that, I
Please.
think the most important is really around the behaviors. If you
Yeah.
establish what are the behaviors that is leading and the team to success and that the team want to harness because they have actually saw a, market improvement and they saw, impact. If you have that indoctrinated in your team kind of operating principles, the way that you show up, that will actually be agnostic of whatever leader comes in because those behaviors are going to be the ones that are demonstrated, that are, promoted, and that are seen as from the new leaders coming in as this is how
Yeah.
we operate here. So I would definitely kind of double down on identifying and promoting those behaviors that really allow the team to be successful and drive the work forward.
Yeah, yeah. Raisa has said, I think asking for feedback from those you lead helps create connection. It absolutely does because, I mean, people feel valued. Like it starts with that people feel like their voice matters. By the way, being asked a genuine probing question actually engages the pleasure centers of our brain. So people like they like being able to ask questions. They like, being able to share their thoughts and their feedback. They want to know they're being listened to. They don't want it falling on deaf ears. By the way, which doesn't mean you're agreeing with everything. I think a lot of times leaders confuse kind of listening and validating with having to agree or having for that person to be right. There's a big difference, and so I talk about that in the programs that I deliver. Is getting to their side of the bridge, understanding them, validating them, acknowledging them doesn't mean agreeing, doesn't mean giving in,
Yeah.
but they do feel a greater sense of connection. So that's a great point, Risa. All right, Kira, I think we have time for one more question, and then we're gonna have a little survey for folks, and then we'll
Sure.
close off.
Yeah, this one goes back to, fear-based culture. So how can leaders recognize when fear or uncertainty is driving inaction on their teams? So is there
Honestly,
any triggers?
like to me, that question almost answers itself. It's when there's inaction on the teams.
1000%. When you
When-
see when there is paralyzation and you have a lack of people sharing ideas, moving work forward, or even collaborating, when you see lack of collaboration and people feel like they can't share or they want to hold everything tight to their vest, most often than not, they're actually coming from a place of a fear, from fear and
yeah.
indoctrinating the culture, 1000%.
Yeah, there's good research that 70% of people don't speak up when they see something wrong or have an idea they think could help. When people aren't challenging stuff, when people aren't sharing their ideas, I mean, people are naturally creative and inventive and they come up with ideas and they challenge stuff. When they stop, that's when you know that there's fear holding people back. And by the way, Jeanette asks, oh, thank you. She said she loves this. I'll start with that. And she asked if we're getting recording. And the answer is yes. We will be sending a recording. We will also be sending a copy of the culture map and an exercise you can do with your team. As we come to the close, we're going to do a little survey, but just before we do, Wema, I want to thank you so much. This has been just such an awesome experience. It's been great getting to know you as part of this process. If people want to get a hold of you, what's the best way to reach out to you? Would that be on
Thank
LinkedIn or?
Yes, on LinkedIn, or you can just go to my website, www.wemahoover.com, and it has my email and contact information. And Bill, it's been such a pleasure working with you, learning of the fantastic work that you do, and actually sharing kind of a lot of our common strategies and approach, and it's made this such a dynamic, not only prep, but discussion and exchange. So I appreciate the opportunity to delve into this important topic with you.
Well, it's been great having you. For those of you who want to get connect with me, absolutely LinkedIn. Bill Benjamin. I'm pretty active. So are you Wema. Go to the Harvard Business Review, read the article. You don't have to have a subscription. It's called The Secret of High Performing Teams. HBR gives everyone 5 free articles a month. You just need an account. Go read the article about the last 80% about the culture map.